right, well, welcome, Darcy, to the USC ECAT Energy Transition Talk podcast.
Thank
Um,
you.
can you introduce yourself? Can you give us a little personal and industry background and tell our audience what got you into the environmental management side of the oil and gas industry?
Well, thank you, Mila, for bringing me on. I'm quite excited to hopefully give some insight. My name is Darcy Spady. I'm a petroleum engineer, graduated in 1986 from University of Alberta in Canada with a degree in petroleum engineering. And I thought I'd have a lovely time in the drilling side of the industry, and I didn't do that much drilling. So, however many years later, I wound up more completion, production, business development. And then after becoming the SPE Global President in 2018, which is a 3-year term, and traveling the world to about 49 different countries, I realized that this whole emissions side, methane reduction, emission reduction was the future. And so I really started focusing on it. And it was a bit of a happenstance. I thought I would teach a course on something I didn't really know about, i.e., methane emissions. And it morphed into doing a lot of work for our local Department of Environment and getting lock, stock, and barrel involved in the methane reduction side of the industry. I'm not typically from big oil and gas. I'm not the usual sort of SPE president. So I was the first ever Canadian elected to that position, and I took advantage of that odd position as not representing a large company, and really enjoyed my global visits. And I really focused on the average member, the grinder, to use a hockey term.
Uh-huh. That's amazing. And can you explain more what that experience was like to be the president of the SPE?
Well, once it sunk in, it was daunting. I had been on the international board for a 3-year term, and that was very enlightening. But being the president, I realized that there's tens of thousands. At the time, I think we had 170,000 members. There's tens of thousands of people out there, and many, many, many of them did not ever have a chance to meet someone that was an SP president.
Mhm.
So one of the things I really enjoyed was the visiting of especially the younger members. And it's interesting. I met with someone just yesterday for coffee that I met in Malaysia. He's actually Yemeni, uh, grew up in Russia, and I met him at school in Malaysia, if you want to do the loop.
Wow.
And he invited me for coffee yesterday, 3 blocks from my house, and we had a wonderful time. And he just said how good it was back in 2018 to meet and talk. So that really would be the highlight, is that I met so many people from so many cultures, and especially the younger half of the workforce. Their views and their outlook is so different from perhaps the group that I went through with. So that was probably the best part of the experience. In addition to just having the chance to do some guidance in where the society was going, like not just oil and gas, but subsurface knowledge, which touched on geophysical, which touched on CCS. I'm now involved a little bit as a director on a helium company, which uses the same rocks and the same drilling procedures. So it really made me understand the total energy mix a little better than my myopic version of the local oil and gas industry.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Darcy, I would, after your presidency, I understand you formed your own little company to kind of pursue this.
Mhm.
And obviously, in addition to the kind of environmental production operations kind of aspects, there's been an amazing revolution in technologies to measure fugitive emissions, methane emissions, as we uh, as we go through this stuff. The Can you reflect a little bit on the technology side of all of this that's helped enable us to better understand what's happening, right? That the industry has a pretty good track record of measuring what stays in the pipe, but not necessarily what escapes from the pipe, right?
Mhm.
So now that's the problem, the challenge. And how has technology helped? How do you see it benefiting all of this work?
Well, Jim, thanks for the question. It's odd because most of the vents we're chasing were designed by us. And the whole mantra, which you have talked to me about, of designing emissions out, is something we never talked about 30 years ago. So in a way, it's actually going back and checking the work that we did 20, 30 years ago when we designed all these vents because it was the safe and right thing to do. So my journey was a bit through the side door. I thought I would start this little company with a couple of partners and do some educational methane emission. We created a course called methane emission uh, measurement and mitigation. And I thought I would get involved in teaching that as I'd learned. And it morphed into doing a lot of work for our Department of Environment on the practical side. Where it started, though, in my jurisdiction and in various subnational jurisdictions and even national jurisdictions, is a lot of the carbon offset, carbon trading, air emission thinking started back in the very late 90s, 99, 98. And so I remember very well in about 2005 to 2010, I was the CEO of a small public company, and our local government in Alberta brought in some very stringent methane emission flaring regulations that we weren't very happy about. As a CEO of a public company, I wasn't happy about what looked like increased taxation. 10 or 15 years later, suddenly we are global leaders because we paid attention to good policy saying you can't just vent. And if you can't build a pipeline, the answer isn't venting. And maybe we shouldn't vent, but we should turn things around, keep it in a closed loop or use solar power or something. So I was part of the problem 15 years before, 20 years before, but good policy and enforcement created an industry that designed things from a technology point of view that made a lot of sense. VRUs, vapor recovery units from tanks, should be the norm going forward instead of a vent. It's safe to vent, but it's not good to vent. Solar powered high efficiency electric motors should be used where there's no power source instead of sales gas. It's more efficient. So these technologies did not exist 20 years ago. So it's actually the emerging technology that my start was from the answer before I actually knew the question. The emerging technologies that we'd been forced to participate in actually drove the fact that we could mitigate methane, we could redesign out all the vents, and we could detect leaks in a very sophisticated manner because we've had to for a while. So that my experiences with the emerging technology is it has actually driven the change, along with what I believe is a price for carbon, whether it's an offset or a cap and trade or a financial driver. If you have a enforceable, robust price for carbon, that can actually finance a lot of the technology. So emerging technology has changed both technically and financially. I think there's kind of a two-part driver there, but it takes policy and regulations, and that's always a fight with producers.
Yeah,
So
and I understand.
obviously it's not just a technology cool new thing. It's the relationship between all of these that get reinforced and aligned with positive movement of a big industry.
Yes.
Yeah, and I understand that each province sets up their own rules and regulations. So from your experience, how have the states and federal regulations evolved in Canada around methane gas emissions? I know you mentioned it previously, how with the technology emerging, it really supports that. And how complex is it for oil and gas operators to stay up to date with all these changing rules?
Well, I like to use the scenario when I worked in West Virginia. I was in the Northeast US for quite a number of years. And at one point, when the unconventionals were just becoming busy in the Northeast US, we used to say that there were 14 different regulatory bodies in one particular state that we had to look at, that we had to answer to. And you multiply that by 32 oil producing states in the US, we start doing the math. There's a lot of complexity. And similarly in Canada, the way it works is the provinces or the subnational governments own the resources and everything to do with it. But that doesn't mean the federal government stays out of it. They have the NDC reporting obligation to the UN. So it does roll up to a national level. When I attended COP last year in Dubai, I was part of the Alberta delegation, but our credentials came through the feds. So you can never separate the two. I don't care if it's the Canadian side or the American side or whatever country, unless you have one national oil company, you've got multiple levels. And so keeping both of those levels happy is very difficult and very complex. I think we just have to take the positive route. Here's what we've done. Here's the amount of tons of CO2 equivalent we've removed from the atmosphere. Here's the difference we're making, and here's the cost. Don't we want more of this? I think it behooves us as an industry to say, I removed this many tons at this many dollars a ton. Right-leaning, left-leaning, federal, national, subnational, we've got to put it in terms that are good for the economy and good for the average user, or we won't get anywhere. And it is complex. I don't know if that answered enough, but it is complex, and each jurisdiction and their politicians have their own ways.
And do you think that with these policies that are coming about and for these oil and gas operations, how important it is, do you think, to have incentives such as, carbon credit?
Okay, I'm gonna unpack that word a little bit. An incentive might be more like a direct incentive in the technology, which can be necessary depending on the situation. I mean, you've had a very large federal incentive in the US for the last couple of years, and that has driven a lot of technology, maybe some silly, but in the end, the technology gets done. So incentives sometimes, depending where we're talking, can be direct incentives from the federal treasury. What I like to see is the carbon market driving itself. So if you have a robust, probably subnational carbon market, so California, New Mexico, Alberta, and a fence around that carbon market. For instance, in Alberta, we have an Alberta regulated carbon market that's verified, that's run by the Canadian Standards Association and verified by independent verifiers. The carbon price is a solid Canadian $65 a ton. You can buy equipment based on carbon pricing and put it in because you know that you can take that number to the bank. In the international markets, you might be $8 or $10 a ton, and you might be triple selling, maybe. So to have a robust carbon market will drive the price. That I'm not thinking is so much an incentive as it is a market structure. But then there's lots of ways to do this. And one of the things that we were beneficiaries of in a big way is a number of years ago, Alberta put in a large emitter levy, a carbon tax on large emitters in our industry and anybody else who wanted to opt in. In our case, if you opted in provincially, you did not have to opt in federally, or you could be exempted. There was equivalency. So what it caused was a large pool of money, I don't know, $500 or $600 million in this fund that was earmarked for environmental, methane reduction, whatever, climate change mitigation stuff. It didn't go into general treasury. So is that an incentive? Or is that a Robin Hood where you're taking from the large emitters and giving back to the large emitters to do the right thing? So I think incentives broadly as a word can mean direct government aid, which can be necessary. It can mean setting aside a carbon levy as part of your working day-to-day tax, if you will, that goes back into the industry. Or it can mean that's the wrong word. It can mean supporting a robust, honest carbon market that actually monetarily incentivizes the reduction of methane. And that falls into the COP Article 6. Someday, hopefully soon, we will get into a subnational jurisdictional trading system where where California can trade with a province in Malaysia, and there can be a robust referee there, and no cheating. That's what I hope we can see in global carbon markets.
Mhm. Oh, great. Thank you.
So you said 15 years ago we were the problem. The industry was the problem. And now we're kind of expected slash required slash maybe want to be part of the solution. Just a question, and not picking on any particular operator, but do you think the industry is serious? Is the industry making progress towards reducing their carbon footprint in terms of their operations? Are some on board and some not? What's your report card on the industry so far?
Ooh, that's a big question. The industry is made up of humans, and human nature is always to fill one's own pockets at the peril of others. So left to its own desires, it's going to be hard to do necessarily the right thing if it's forward looking, and it's going to cost you money. So that we're always fighting with that human nature of enriching oneself, I think. But
So
I
we
think the
need
industry is
regulatory
there.
guardrails, I guess, to improve our behavior.
Yeah. And I think that's great, because as industry, we have an obligation to come together and do things jointly in a manner that we can make money, but still do the right thing for the population, thus the regulatory guardrails. I actually think we're making really good progress. And I think a couple of things have happened. Number one, we've seen a younger generation that's a different demographic than me. 30 years ago, there were a lot of guys that looked and sounded like me running the industry. Now we have a lot more diversity in every way, gender, nationality, language, whatever. So that's really, I think, being part of the fabric of society and hearing society say, well, we don't like you because, and then working on that. I think we've moved. So suddenly things like climate change, I choose not to debate. I choose to assume that the debate is done and we need to move forward because that's what the public wants. So I think we're doing well. We've changed philosophically. I'm part of a group based in Paris called the Energy Action Project, which is all about energy poverty. This is important for us to realize. We're not just producers of energy for rich people to spend more money on toys. This is part of our obligation to society to make sure that people can afford to heat their homes, and that we insulate better, and all kinds of other things. So I think the industry is doing well because of we're being forced by society to have a little broader picture. I think the industry is doing well because it's a younger, more diverse generation. But the third thing that I think is making a big difference is financial institutions are forcing this. So in some jurisdictions where the government is not the big policeman, financial institutions realize that if they have a documentable track record, if they have certified gas, if they have a better than industry average in all the things that matter to their shareholders, there is actually a premium on the sale price. So now you're getting financial institutions that factor into the sale price or expectation. We've been up to date with OGMP 2.0 standards. We've been up to date with Project Canary. We've, whatever MIQ, we have this status. Therefore, it's a premium price when it comes to sell, which goes back to the human nature of driving the desire to make money. But the financial institutions honestly have taken a real lead in making us accountable. So I think with those three factors, the industry is doing much better. When we started this program in 2020, for the Alberta Ministry of Environment, I thought, and our goal was to take this fund money and put it back in the industry for things that are emission reduction focused. I thought I'd have some pushback from my peers in the industry. I thought I'd hear, oh, you're this and you're that, and oh, you're whatever labels. I had zero. That shocked me because a lot of my friends, classmates, whatever, they're small producers. And I actually had zero. Of course, I was offering subsidized money to do it. Of course, they're going to smile and take some of the money. But I was shocked at how little pushback I had from the old boys, if you will.
Well, that's an interesting observation that while we started having to be forced into it, and then technology enabled us, and our
Mhm.
bankers encouraged us, maybe those three things you mentioned, maybe we've changed.
I think we have. I agree.
Yeah, and um, on the technology side of all this change, right? Um, as we evolve into, into the industry involving more like better technology systems to help improve, emission reduction or just improve the process overall. Um, it will have its own advantages and uncertainties,
Mhm.
but how accurate are they?
Mhm.
And what areas do you think the general public needs to hear to better understand about these measurements to build that trust?
Well, I'm taking notes because I want to make sure I answer both parts of that question. How accurate are we? I'm going to put that on the parking lot for a second. Sorry, that last part of your question again, can you repeat that? Because I'm writing the first one down, I forgot the second one.
What areas do you think the general public needs to
Ah,
hear to better understand about these measurements to build that trust?
yeah. Okay, thank you for keeping my brain in line there. I'm going to start with that. So, first of all, I believe very, very strongly that the general public needs to see us as human beings that are part of the fabric. I know a large part of our listening group is going to be based in California, and I like that because if you're in California and you're in the oil and gas industry, you're probably a bit of a pariah. So it helps to go home every night and hear your neighbor who is not in the industry say, "What are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? Why are you polluting?" Blah, 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 blah. It keeps us healthy. If we get in the bubble of the energy centers, and I live in one, where all we talk about is our own little thing, we don't hear from the average person who may not vote the way we do. And so I think we have to be part of the fabric of society. And we as an industry, in my generation, I believe we've really failed in that. We've hung out on our own and patted ourselves on the back and said how wonderful we are, which is true. But I think the public, from what they need to know about it and how accurate the measurements are, the public needs to be assured that we're part of society. When I was SB president, I I came into this habit of carrying around an accordion. And the point was not that I have a number of accordions and I like to play with bands. The point was to remind people that we're humans and we're not just all about production and production increase and money and taking it home. Be artistic, be athletic, be holistic, be part of a charity, be part of the fabric of humanity. And we failed, so now we're playing catch up. So to me, it's not about whether we can say they trust the measurements. Do they trust us? Do they trust us as reasonable human beings, not just greedy corporate types? So we have to earn that back. What's helped is the accuracy of the measurements. So 10 years ago, we did not have satellites that could detect plumes to, tens of square meters. 10 years ago, we did not have sophistication of OGI cameras that we do now. We had EPA level, or sorry, EPA method 21 with a meter and a set of procedures. Now we have not just satellites and multiple forms of OGI cameras. We now have truck mounted detectors. We now have stationary mounted detectors. We have a sophistication that's unbelievable. And unlike just measuring thermal imaging with an OGI camera, we have ways that we can detect up to parts per billion of methane.
Wow.
So the measurement has gone crazy with its accuracy. We're being forced to go even more. But with the advent of satellites, and now we don't just have one or two, we have multiple satellite providers, and we have multiple groups that take satellite data from NASA and all the other public places and have very good algorithms we can find the culprits. So suddenly you can't just vent and cover your eyes and assume nothing. We are now accountable because of technology, but the measurement technology is getting amazing and it's going to bring the cost down. Europe is the one to watch. Europe just brought a bunch of very strict guidelines in May, and they're asking for all operators to do OGI camera work pretty much on all sites and have about 7 days or 30 days to remedy it. That is a massive order. Can
Yeah.
we do that? I don't know, but the technology is going to take another leap because of orders like that.
Yeah. And how well do you think that these operators are doing in explaining their investments and, upgrading these technologies?
It depends where you are. If you're a national oil company owned by the government and you don't have to talk about this, you may not be informing your people well, but it might be part of the national revenue. If you're in California, you've got people staring at you and watching your sites all the time. You must keep a different level of information. So we as operators are going to do to the level we're told, which is why I think we have to have that holistic discussion between policymakers and operators saying, okay, we don't want to get you in lawsuits, but we want to know what you're doing. There's a real touchy balance. Um, some public companies may feel they have to report more. Some public companies may feel they have to cover more. It depends on the regulations. It is all over the map, but by and large, with regulations getting tougher and with banks getting tougher on being part of a system of quality management, um, the reporting is being done. Whether the public is knowing it or not, it's really jurisdiction dependent. I wish I could answer that more clearly. We now have better measurement, and frankly, um, independent parties can do it through the fence. You could get somebody that wanted to invest in a technology that sniffs some of these low levels, and they could literally sit outside the location and say, "You guys have a problem inside there," and no company wants to be told what to do because that's that no
Yeah.
company wants to get there through that route. So
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. That's very insightful. Yeah.
I use the statement sometimes in some of my articles that there's nowhere to hide, and you
no,
described that very well. Um, a couple of years ago, I my department head, Dr. Miskimmons, who's going to be the next SP president, um, was encouraged by the school's marketing department to write a public op-ed article in a local newspaper about methane emissions and the changes and the progress. And so we, of course, we when we decided to write it, of course, she being my boss, she told me to write it. So I had to write the article and put her name on it. But it got published, and then the crazy thing happened that there were several environmental organizations that said, "Could you come visit us and tell us more?"
yeah.
And of course, then she's my boss; she orders me to do it, and I have to sit in front of the Sierra Club and a couple other environmental organizations, and I was wondering if I was going to make it out at the end.
Yeah.
But it was a very constructive discussion. Um, they didn't see me as big oil company; they saw me as
Yeah.
some wacky academic. But it was a conversation between people, not between sides of an
Exactly.
argument. And they had great questions. They didn't always understand what I was saying, which means it's my problem to explain it better.
Hmm.
They didn't always agree with my conclusions, but that's okay. I respect that right. It's a journey. But my question here is going to be to successfully bring all this together. You need the operator. You need finance, you need regulatory, you need technology companies, you need the community that sits
Yes.
around it. And of course, one of the things the United Nations Climate that has talked about is we need collaboration in order
Mhm.
to move forward. We get, and of course, you've seen this now over a couple of decades. How do we get people to collaborate who before that they actually didn't even acknowledge each other existed?
Yeah, how do we indeed get people to collaborate? Again, we're talking human nature, and if you look at the history of the world, it's not that good. Um, I think the dialogue going on right now in the COP um, process is healthy because what we're seeing is nations from the global south saying that's not fair to us. You guys have produced and polluted for a long time, and we now have a chance to pull ourselves out of economic hardship, and you're saying no, we can't. These sorts of discussion I think are very healthy on a global level. Now people might start labeling me immediately as this or that, but we're humans, and pollution and emissions travel across borders. And if we truly want to be global in this, we have to figure out how to collaborate and how to talk, and dialogue is the first step. And we have to do better at that. I love what you said about meeting with some of these environmental groups, because I have found in my past, they're not that nasty. And they assumed I was going to be nasty with some red horns poking out. And get together, have a coffee or something else, talk human to human. I've had a lot more success sitting down and being reasonable than I ever have trying to bang on a desk and force someone that I have the answer. So what you described in your little story, I think is so critical. We need people to come in with the attitude that, hey, I want to learn. And how can we be better? How can we be part of the fabric of society? I don't want to be your enemy. We actually had in 99 to no 2001, 2002. I was working for Triana Energy out of Charleston, West Virginia, and we drilled a well on the campus of the University of Charleston. Um, it was their mineral rights, and we actually drilled this well as a community project, and I wrote an SPE paper on it. And it was an amazing journey. The SPE paper is there. I don't have the number, but if you put urban well operations on a university campus, I'm sure you'll find it. And what amazed me is the community that was very opposed to us as an industry. By the end, it was some of the biggest opponents that came out in the press and said nice things about us. I literally stood back because once we'd interacted and dialogued with the community and shown the benefit to the local university and their fundraising and how we operated the industry, it was amazing just because we dialogued and we went through all the regulatory processes and this and that. But we can't hide. We can't stay in our bubble. We have to be part of dialogue and part of the fabric of society. Maybe meet with some of these groups and don't even talk about our industry. Maybe just talk about the problems they're facing and get to be in their shoes for a while. And this is what I think the younger generation and some of the gender diversity, frankly, I'm so welcoming of that because people think differently from different segments of society, and it's going to do nothing but help our industry.
The large oil company that is probably taking the lead in direct air capture and carbon sequestration
Mhm.
is their CEO as a woman who talks differently than the other
Yep.
good old boys
Yep.
that were her peers. And you talked a lot about talk, and I think listening is you inferred it, obviously, but that's critical as well because you need to hear what the other side is thinking and feeling with regard to all of this stuff. And we can't use the techno babble, right? I mean,
No.
I can jump into that talk and talk about infrared spectroscopy and all the rest of that, and they just go, "Can this guy please leave the room?" You have to talk about common language.
Yeah, I completely agree. We as engineers want to give engineering answers. We want to tell people why we're right because we've done the math. Stop right there.
Yeah, I think you brought up amazing points about, just bridging that gap, bridging the gap between, let's say even industry knowledge to environmental knowledge, just, seeing all sides of the perspective and bridging that gap and just communicating. Um, it I think is we're seeing that now, as you mentioned, with even with the younger generations, with my generation,
Mhm.
you know, we're much more vocal about things, I feel like.
Well, you're more vocal, but we love to plug our ears.
Yeah, but it's very true on, just bridging that gap and, you know, not even coming to an understanding, but just like a language, understanding each other. But circling back to the technological aspects that we talked about earlier, you mentioned how Europe, was the one to look at. Um, how how are these technology capabilities spreading around the globe from your perspective? And are they expensive to deploy?
Yeah, no, they're not expensive. Honestly, the price has come down and per function, they're very affordable. Um, and what we're seeing is the jurisdictions that measure and put it in databases have a massive advantage. And so as as we're moving from estimation to measurement globally, and if you look at the UN's OGMP 2.0 standards, which most large oil companies are part of, it's about getting that inventory to an accuracy stage so that there's no surprises. As we measure, suddenly countries have to do it. And and you might say, well, you know, they're not a democratic system or whatever. They don't really have to, but they do because they're stakeholders, whether it's the people in rural areas or the indigenous population that is having their livelihood taken away, whether or not it is our industry or not, we're getting the blame and the pressure is increasing massively. The flaring word is bad. People can see that from airplanes. So all these things are driving. It's shocking how big the market has become globally in getting the numbers right. We've said since we started our little company that roughly we're 100% wrong. Um, if we think the emission of something is 2, it's actually probably double that. It's probably 4. We're generally wrong by about 100%, from estimation to actual. Well, just the other day, I was talking to one particular national oil company, um, from the Asia region, and they said, it's kind of shocking because it's not 2, it's more like 10 times. As people get to measure, they realize, oh, things are way, way worse than what we thought from the manufacturer specs. And this is universal. I said a country in Asia, it's the same in the US, it's the same in Canada. What we think and what we want to think in our inventory and what our production engineers want to think, when she's looking at the numbers of what the pollution rate is on this venting device, it's the manufacturer spec. That might have worked that way on day one out of the factory. But on day 5, the operator went and drilled out the orifice with a drill because then it would flow better. Stuff is never what we think. It's not even double. It's probably an order of magnitude worse than what we think. And as this is happening globally, the pressure on countries to report their NDCs and have data to back it up is big pressure. And so it doesn't matter what kind of a country you are, if you're part of European bodies, you're gonna have to own up to that. I mean, there are some rogue countries out there that maybe don't, but the users are going to demand it. Europe consumers are demanding a higher level. Europe producers, they've estimated for a long time, and now these new rules are maybe a little too much, but they've really, as these jurisdictions, maybe it's Western, but the interest from places in the Middle East, places in South America, places in Southeast Asia, places in Central Asia, the interest in those jurisdictions for reporting and measuring and being part of the global accountability, the interest is massive and the cost is relatively low. And if you know where you're venting, that's economic gain if you can fix it. So you might be getting 1 or 2% more sales gas if
Yeah.
you capture it.
Well, Darcy, I really appreciate you taking the time this morning and sharing your experience, expertise, perspective, all of that extremely valuable. Um, but there's bound to be some nugget of knowledge, wisdom that you have that we haven't kind of pulled out with our questions. Can you, if, and just as a last, kind of comment here and the rest of that, Is there anything that we didn't ask that we should talk about in our conversations?
I think we covered it all. I went all over the map. Um, I would suggest that the one thing we didn't talk about was politics, and I'm not going to get into weeds, but be part of the political process. If you have opinions, make sure the people making the regulations and the policy know about it. I'm not telling you to be crazy. I'm just saying don't be silent and don't hide in that bubble. We need to be part of the process, part of the fabric of society on all levels.
A lot of my research over the last couple of years is dealing with changing regulations. And so I've had a chance to meet, as well as those Sierra Club members, I had a chance to meet a lot of uh, the, the public health officials and oil and gas commission regulators in this, at least in Colorado. And I found
Mhm.
out that they don't have horns either, right? I mean, they're some pretty reasonable people trying to accomplish the same goals that I would like.
Knowing we're wrapping up on time, I'll make a quick final comment. 2 weeks ago, I was at the in our capital in Ottawa, testifying before a Senate subcommittee on energy environment about this very topic: energy transition and climate change in the oil and gas industry. It's public domain. You can see what I said. Those senators were full of questions from every political stripe, full of questions. And one thing they said is, "We don't hear from your industry very often." Well, shame on us.
Well, thank you, sir. Much appreciated. You've certainly contributed more to our podcast and for our audience with regard to that. So um, you shared forward. You did a very good job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us for the future of energy. Special thanks to each of our guests today and to our technical wizard, Abhi, for his important contributions to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you can automatically get access to all our new episodes. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.